Hey, this is Sandy Peters, psychic medium and author of Butterfly's Soul. You are listening to Unknown Origins Radio.
We live in a world filled with the unknown. Ghosts and spirits wander through our physical dimension. Undiscovered creatures lurk in the shadows, and strange lights and crafts seem to dominate our skies. Modern science refuses to acknowledge their existence, yet credible eyewitnesses are convinced these things are real, and it's up to independent researchers to search for the truth. Welcome to Unknown Origins Radio.
Good evening and welcome everyone to another edition of Unknown Origins Radio, where once again we talk about everything, and I do mean everything, having to do with the strange and paranormal. I'm your host, Mark Johnson, and unfortunately our regular co-hosts, Lauren DePinto and Carrie Ann Versace, are not able to be with us tonight. It's Carrie Ann's birthday, so we want to wish her a happy 29th birthday. Well, you know, she wants it to be 29th, but, you know, we'll just say 29th birthday and hope she's out doing something fun tonight. And Lauren is at an event with her husband tonight, so hopefully she's, having a good time as well. I heard she might be tripping the light fantastic. That's always a good thing. So, that means you're stuck with me. Actually, you're not only just stuck with me tonight. We have a guest co-host who's very kind enough to come on and join us tonight. A good friend of ours. His name's Chris Nicolleti from Scream Paranormal. How are you tonight, Chris?
Good, Mark. How you doing?
Doing excellent. I'm really glad that you could come on and join me tonight, and hopefully we have some fun.
Yeah, I'm excited about this because the topics we're going to go over, wow. All the reports and everything. I'm excited about this one. Yeah.
Now, I was wondering if you could tell everybody a bit about Scream Paranormal and your group.
Sure. We've been together now for about, on and off like 5-6 years now. We do a lot of, residential investigations, business investigations as well. We do a lot of events where we educate the public into a little bit more into, bring people into the paranormal, how to conduct a proper ghost hunt, how to use equipment, kind of give people a springboard into ghost hunting and stuff along those lines. I'm also into, a little bit of UFOlogy stuff. I've been to, I have a friend of mine that's really deep into it, and so I touch base on it a little bit, so.
Well, that's excellent. I mean, we got to hang out with you at Phenomenology in Gettysburg this last March, and I remember there was one night where you were walking down the hallway to the tavern, the bar, and you had an experience. I was wondering if you could tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. When I was walking down that one long hallway, and I ended up seeing a shadow just cross over right at the end of the hallway. And I was the only one that saw it. Another person on my team saw it too. And I look at her and I go, did you just see what I just saw? And she goes, I didn't want to say anything because I thought it was a trick of, the light or something. I'm like, no, I saw it too. It was a shadow that went from right to left, right around the corner.
Now, I remember I was standing there when you saw it, and you came around. You had this look of shock on your face.
I couldn't believe it.
Like you quite literally saw a ghost.
Exactly. And the thing is, I wasn't even expecting it. I mean, cause then I talked to somebody, I think it was like later on that weekend, and I was like, I was asking, you guys ever have any weird stuff that happens around here? And she's like, yeah, this place is haunted. Yes. There's soldiers that cross through here all the time. And it's right where the battles took place, right? I think, what was it, Pickett's Charge? Isn't that where, right around that road there? I think it's Eisenhower, Road or whatever it is. It all started right around that area.
Yeah, the Eisenhower, Hotel is on the southern end of the battlefield. Pickett's Charge, which was about 2 miles farther north. We were still on the Confederate side. There was fighting close down to that end. That was about the tail end of the battlefield.
Okay, right. Okay, well, from what, like I said, what they told me was, they constantly see things happening around there. I was not expecting it at all, and what I had seen, and the great thing about it was having a team member with me to see it, and we both looked at each other like, wow, okay, this is cool. You know, we weren't expecting it, but it was nice. It was a nice little added feature to the weekend. And Feminology 104, Dana and Chris do an amazing job every year. So.
Well, we also just got the official announcement, so hopefully I'm going to be one of the first radio shows talking about it, is they've just announced, Dana Wingard of NEPI has just announced that Phenomenology 105 is a go. So we're shooting for the third weekend in March. Once again, I believe it's going to be at Gettysburg. For any of you who did not get a chance to go this last year, you have to go to this event. It is way much fun, the most phenomenal, phenomenal gift. I use that a lot when I talk about phenomenology. But so many great guests, and I'm really excited to see who they have lined up this year. And our guest tonight, David Weatherly, he comes on. I think he should definitely be a guest this coming year, because I think when people listen to what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to realize how much fun we're going to have with this. So definitely we're looking forward to that. Just also wanted, before we get into our show tonight, I wanted to make a couple of reminders for everybody, especially with Global Radio Alliance. If, getting used to our show, if you ever miss a show, we archive all of our shows on our website. So if you go to www.unknownoriginsradio.com, you can download all of our past shows for the last year and a half that we've been on the air. And see, here's some of our great guests. Now, we also have an iTunes podcast, so you can go to iTunes, type in Unknown Origins Radio, subscribe for free to our podcast. We update it every week with all the latest and greatest shows. See, that's another great way to listen to us, too. So, keep downloading these shows. I know we get a lot more downloads sometimes than listeners, but as long as you people are tuning in, we really hope you're enjoying yourselves, and we really want to see those numbers increasing. So tell your friends to tune in. And we also have just touching base on some of our upcoming shows. We're already getting into the summer. This coming weekend is Memorial Day weekend, the official kickoff of the summer. And we are already booked, it seems, halfway through the summer with upcoming shows. And we've got some fantastic guests coming up for us. We have Corvus Nocturnum coming on to talk about all things having to do with the dark and strange and unusual. We've had Corvus on before. He's a fantastic guest. Have you ever heard Corvus speak?
No, have not yet. No.
He has several great books out. He's got a new book out about haunted places around the country. His book, I, Lucifer, talking about Satan. He is a Satanist, but not a devil worshiper, and they get into that in the show. It's really fascinating. I recommend you tuning in. We're also going to have Scotty Roberts on in the next couple of weeks talking about the rise and fall of the Nephilim. We have Ben Hansen from Sci-Fi's Factor Faked, Paranormal Files.
You said Ben Hansen? Is that his name?
Hansen?
I joke. I kid. I love that guy. He's great. Every time I see him, he's a riot. So.
Oh, and he is so tall. It's like you're yes. I'm not a small guy, but I'm sitting there looking up and going, damn, I need this stool just to look him in the eye.
Yeah, that's true.
And we're also going to have Katrina Whitman from Paranormal State is going to be on too. So that's just some of the many guests that we're going to be having coming up soon. So you definitely need to be tuning in every single week. Don't miss an episode, because you're going to miss out on some great stuff.
I think I met Katrina once. I think it was at Fort Mifflin. That was, when was that? Probably, I think it was last summer or something like that. And she was great. She made the best duck face I've ever seen. Well, next to Chris Fleming. Chris Fleming he beats it.
Oh, okay. Well, I have to see Chris Fleming's duck face.
I have it on my blog. You can always go and check it out, Scream Paranormal, and just take a look at it. And he's up there. He's making the best duck face. I don't know if he actually approved of that photo, but I had to put it up anyways.
Well, with Katrina, I was disappointed because, a couple years ago, and I've told people this story before, we did an episode of Paranormal State, and she was the one cast member. Her and Chip Coffey were not there for that episode. So I was really disappointed because I was looking forward to meeting Katrina, and so and instead of Chip, they had Michelle Belanger instead. So I was a little disappointed. I really wanted to meet Katrina, but at least, hey, we get to talk to her this time. So
yes, she's great person, love her. Yep.
And I just want to point out, we had a couple of strange things happening in the news this week. First of all, yesterday we had the full solar eclipse of the sun, mainly affected the West Coast. And I must say I am bitterly disappointed to wake up this morning and find that the zombie apocalypse did not happen.
I knew you were going to say that.
I'm crushed. I had my rifle. I had, several boxes of shells.
Provisions, everything ready to go.
I was ready to go. I wanted to blast something, and it didn't happen. What the F was up with that? These Mayans are continuing to disappoint me. Now they're telling us 2012 is not going to happen.
Yeah. I read about that as well. Yes. And you know what? Until we hit that day, I mean, who knows, right? Everybody's got different opinions on what's really going to happen. The awakening, there's so many different things. I mean, really, you could do a whole radio show on that, We could. We did a 2012 prediction show, the first of the year, and we'll probably do another one as we get closer in December before the December 21st date. We'll definitely want to touch on that again. Because, if we're here the day after December 22nd, people's got some splaining to do. So, but we also had a couple other things happening. Now, there was last Monday, a week ago today, there was this UFO incident at Denver Airport. Did you hear about that? There was a near miss with a private jet. Yes. No, I did hear about that one. Yes, and they couldn't identify it on the radar. It didn't even show up on the radar, but the pilot called it in.
Yes.
I remember that. Go on, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, and this has caught a lot of buzz going around. Our friends Stan and Lisa Romanek, of course, were right on top of this, and we're commenting on this because they live in the Denver area. Of course, they've had a lot of their experiences with UFOs too. So, very, very strange, buzzing UFOs buzzing jets at Denver Airport. Of course, if that piques my interest because. For other reasons, too, because I don't know if you ever watch Jesse Ventura's show, Conspiracy.
You're talking about the underground tunnels at the airport.
Yes.
The underground facility, yes. I keep up on that quite a bit. FEMA camps, everything, the whole bit. Yeah, I'm fascinated with all that, and just wonder what the heck they're doing out there. So when the UFOs start buzzing the airport, makes me think, maybe they know something we don't. Well, maybe they're checking out the planet. Maybe they're sick and tired of us destroying it. There's so many different theories on that as well. I mean, what is the one theory? The reptilians. The whole government's made out of reptilians and they're controlling everybody and we're just, all we are is like cattle to them. It
reminds me of my ex-girlfriends. Oh, God. Well, here's what...
You're going to be getting a phone call later or two, right?
Nah, they already think I'm the Antichrist anyway, so. So anyway, we're going to get ready here. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk with our guest tonight, David Weatherly, about black-eyed kids. So don't go away. We'll be right back just after these messages. Our guest, I have a story to tell you. Let me start off by talking about Paul. Now, there was a knock on Paul's front door, which pulled him from work. He stood from the desk in his home office in a small North Dakota town and walked downstairs. He didn't find what he expected on that April 2011 day. I found a young boy who appeared to be about 16 or 17 standing on my front porch, Paul said. The thin teenager wore almost threadbare corduroy pants and dress shirt that hung off his body. Black, unkempt hair hung lifelessly around his face. He asked me about a Chevy Tracker that I had sitting in my front of my garage with a for sale sign on it, Paul said. He spoke very clearly and slowly in a rather monotone voice. It was like he was trying to force his words to make a point to me. He never said anything threatening. He only asked me to tell him about the vehicle. But there was something odd about the boy that set Paul on edge. I felt uneasy from the get-go, but proceeded to give him details about the Chevy, Paul said. Talking about the vehicle, Paul tried to figure out why the boy's presence set his nerves afire. He discovered why. I noticed his eyes were jet black. They had no pupils or irises. I was taken back immediately. At that moment, Paul saw the teen wasn't alone. There was a second youth there with him, standing at the end of the walk that leads to my front porch, to the front of my garage, Paul said. The girl stood 15 to 20 feet from him. She looked to be about the same age, maybe younger. She had blonde hair that also looked unkempt and was wearing an old faded dress. The girl didn't speak, and she never took a step closer. She just stood at the end of the wall, smiling. I couldn't tell if her eyes were the same as the boys, but looking back, it wouldn't have surprised me if they were, Paul said. He just kept talking about the vehicle, on alert, ready for any sudden movement from either team. After I finished telling the boy about the SUV, he asked me if I could take him for a ride in it, Paul said. Again, I felt very uneasy and said that I was busy. The boy again asked if I could just take him for a ride so he could see how it worked. Again, I declined. The boy kept asking for a ride along with Paul. During that time, I never once mentioned the price of the vehicle, and he never asked about it, Paul said. He only continued to ask that I give him a ride in the Chevy so he could see how it worked. Those were his exact words. After a few minutes of pleading, Paul said he had to leave. I told him I was very busy and needed to go, and then I slammed the door shut and locked it, he said. It wasn't until I went into the kitchen to get myself a drink that I realized how scared I was. Paul's hand shook so badly he couldn't open a can of soda. After a few minutes, he began to relax, took a drink, and called his wife. I told her what happened, he said. While I was on the phone, I looked outside to see if the boy and his girlfriend were still there over the SUV, but they were gone. Paul eventually asked his neighbors if they had seen the teenagers, but none of them had, nor had they seen them in the area before, and Paul hoped it stayed that way. Well, that is just one of the many black-eyed kid stories that has been making the rounds on the internet, and is just this new phenomenon. It's not so much a new phenomenon. I think it's been around for a long time, but it's just now hitting the public consciousness. So tonight's guest is an author, paranormal investigator, cryptozoologist, and UFOologist, and he's the founder of Two Crows Paranormal, and has spent over 35 years exploring the weird and unexplained. Now, his new book, Black-Eyed Children, covers one of the creepiest phenomenon I've ever heard of, and is a subject I've been dying to talk about for a long time. So please welcome David Weatherly to the program. How are you tonight, David?
I'm great, Mark. Chris, thanks for having me on.
Now, I do have to ask you, David, that in researching your bio, I came across a story on the internet, and I have to ask, is this the same David Weatherly? I came across an article about a David Weatherly trapped in the wilderness and having to play Angry Birds until he could.
No, not me.
Very strange. It was a funny story about a gentleman who was trapped in the woods and overnight, and he had nothing to do, so he played Angry Birds until he could.
Does it make sense, right?
I don't think I've heard that one, but I guess you got to do something to pass the time, right?
Yes.
And when your cell phone dies or whatever you're playing it on, you can always play with the real Angry Birds that are out there, right?
Yeah, really.
Trees, start throwing them around, you know.
Yeah, I think I'd build a fire and look around and see if I could find a Sasquatch if I was in that situation.
Well, David, this story that I just told is one of many that have been starting to now come out of the woodwork. I first heard of this phenomenon last year. I give credit to Dave Schrader on Darkness Radio. He was the first person who really brought this subject up that I had ever heard about it. And it's just been making the rounds. And you've written your book called Black-Eyed Children about this phenomenon. So I was wondering if you could talk about, do you know how this phenomenon got started or how far back it really goes?
Well, that's a compound question. I'll give you two answers. First of all, the modern version of this phenomena, which we're calling black-eyed children or black-eyed kids, you'll often see on the internet, also BEKs, which is just short for black-eyed kids. That particular term started around the late 90s with a journalist named Brian Bethel. When the internet was just becoming popular and chat rooms and forums were sort of in their infancy and taking off, and this gentleman, Brian Bethel, posted a story on one of those about an encounter he had with two teenage boys in a parking lot. And these boys both had solid black eyes. They presented him with a series of strange questions. They wanted to see a movie, and they claimed they had forgotten their money, and they wanted to ride, back to their house. And of course, he's clear enough minded to be looking around. He notices on the marquee that the movie's, already more than half over, and none of the things are quite adding up. And he has the typical fear response that we see with these situations, refuses to let the boys in the vehicle and drives away. So he posted this story, and it really caught people's attention. The response was that a number of other stories similar to this were posted, and over the years since then, it's kind of grown on the internet. Now, at that time, there were some indications that this could be an urban legend that was sprouting up due to the internet. Some of the stories were friend of a friend, and a lot of very mysterious but also very generic accounts showed up. And it was really hard to distinguish any solid information about the phenomena. But it really resonated with people, and it struck a nerve for some reason. So the stories have continued to come out, especially over the last several years. There's just more and more attention is being paid to the phenomena. And you mentioned Dave Schrader. I've been on his show a few times, and it's something that, whenever he does a show, I've been on there a couple times talking about the black-eyed kids, and there's always just a huge response from his listeners. People are disturbed and intrigued about the phenomena all at the same time. More and more reports keep coming to light. Now, the second part of your question, what I have found during the course of researching my book was that the phenomena is actually much, much older. It's just that in a lot of the older stories, you have to sort of root around and find similarities, because the focus a lot of the times was not just on the eyes. And I think that's what some of the confusion is these black-eyed beings. Black-eyed beings you can find in cultures all over the world, and, a lot of different types of manifestations. So I actually believe this is a very, very old phenomena. It's just that we're seeing a very modern version of it now.
So the reports that we've been hearing, coming all across the country, have you gotten reports that coming from other parts of the world as well, modern reports?
Oh, yes. As widespread as England to Australia, Canada, South Africa, the Middle East. It seems to be a worldwide phenomena that is slowly increasing at this point.
Now, what do you, in the research that you've done on this, I mean, honestly, what do you make of this? Does it seem like it's a paranormal phenomenon, a spiritual ghost? I mean, what is your take on what people are experiencing?
Well, it's definitely paranormal. That's, to some degree, it's a little bit of a mystery still, because, one of the things about this phenomena is that these kids, for lack of a better word, these children share traits with a lot of different paranormal manifestations. And, the debate is still kind of going on as to exactly what they are. There may be several things that explain them. A lot of people very firmly believe that they are alien hybrids. And indeed, there are some things about the phenomena that would make them appear to be very similar to reports of hybrid children. But, there are just as many people that feel that the kids are some kind of demonic entity or undead entity. And yet again, there are things that correlate between those two possibilities. For instance, these kids, they never intrude, in the sense that they never barge into someone's house or car or hotel room, wherever it is they show up. But they always try to convince the person to let them in. Now, that harkens back to, classical vampire or undead lore, in that, they can't enter until they're invited over the threshold. So it's that's one of the things that I find most intriguing about this phenomena, is that it just shares so many things in common with other areas of the paranormal.
I was going to comment on that. That's the one thing that intrigues me about this phenomenon, is it's always these kids asking to either come into a house or approaching somebody, wanting a ride, wanting that asking permission for that personal contact to either enter their sanctity of their home or in a private, like in the cab of a car. They want in. They're always looking for a way in, and their responses, it's almost seems robotic in the term that they're just monotone, asking the question, not really being rude, but just being persistent.
I'd like to add on that a little bit more too. One of the things I read about with a lot of the stories that, I've touched base with on the, the BEKs is the fact that, they get irate when you turn them away. And the emotional response that the people who are in contact with these entities or whatever they are, they get the feeling even before they even realize half the time that they get their complexion. They might be in the dark a bit in the shadow, and they can't really make out their facial expressions or their black eyes or whatever. They get just this feeling of doom. They just don't want them around. They get uncomfortable. It was one story I was reading about the Marine, right, who was stationed, I think it was in North Carolina or whatever it was, and he answered the door, and here was just two kids that came to his door, and he just got this foreboding feeling. He didn't even want them anywhere near. He had to close. He slammed the door in their face, is what he did. And it's just amazing, the whole feeling, the vibe you get from them, and like they pressure you to come in. They want to come in. They get mad at you if they they don't like barge in, but they get mad at you, and they're like, you have to let me in, kind of is their response, from the stories that I've read. So
yeah, they definitely get more insistent.
Exactly.
They're I haven't really encountered any stories where the kids have become overly emotional, but they certainly produce an incredible level of emotional reaction from the victims, for lack of a better word. And it almost seems as though one of the goals of these children is actually to produce that fear response.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you think? Have you ever heard of a case where somebody has actually let these beings in?
I have a handful of those, and there's one particular case that is in the book, takes up a full chapter, and it details what happened when a child was invited in. So the brief version of this story is that a woman was driving home from work. She had a 10-year-old in the back of her SUV with her. She lives in a small area, and she pulled into a convenience store, jumped out, ran in to get her milk or bread or whatever, and she left her child in the back. She's done this countless times on the way home from work. And when she comes back, gets back in the SUV, reaches down to turn the key, and just out of habit looks up in the rearview mirror, and staring back at her are a pair of black eyes. And she has the immediate fear response. She jumps out of the SUV. There's a black-eyed boy who is in the back seat. He's in the middle of the back seat, sitting right next to her son. She jerks her son out of the SUV and runs back into the store. And as it unfolded, the clerk, of course, thought something was wrong. She's kind of stuttering and stammering that somebody's in her car, and he rushes outside to see what's happening, thinking, God, is this a robbery or, what's happening? Not a sign of anyone. The SUV sitting there in the parking lot with both the doors open. And she's kind of an emotional mess because she's feeling all of this incredible level of fear. She ends up calling her husband, who comes up to try to settle her down. Now, she hasn't told him what's happened at this point, but he agrees to take her SUV and drive it home and let her drive his vehicle. A couple of miles away, he gets in a wreck and totals the SUV at the hospital. The child, their child, became ill in the following days. And when they took him to the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with this boy. And part of the reason they couldn't determine what was wrong with him was because his symptoms were rotated through a whole vast range of different things. They thought this boy had the flu, then they thought he had appendicitis, and then he broke out, they thought he had the measles. It was just a crazy, ever-changing number of symptoms that was displaying. He was very ill, and this went on for several weeks. Now, the husband was okay. He ended up with just some minor injuries, and they thought he had a concussion at first, so they kept him for observation. But as everything unfolded over the next couple of days, the wife, she talked to her son, and she said, she tried to stay calm about it, and she said, who was that boy? Do you know him from school? And the response was, no, Mommy, I don't know him. Well, why was he in our car? Well, he asked me to invite him in because, I thought we could go to my house and play. So, here we have, this is a rare case actually where one of these black-eyed children has presented themselves to another child. And in this case, the child in question really didn't see anything unusual. He was just seeing a potential playmate. He thought it was innocent. And in that innocence, he invited the boy into the car. The result, obviously, was not very good for the family. His mother, in particular, is convinced that it was only through, a lot of prayer and positive energy focused on that boy that he was able to finally get well and heal. And for this day, he's fine. But definitely lasting effects on the family from that very strange encounter.
Wow.
Can I ask you one quick question, David? I just want to.
Yeah, sure.
I find this really interesting, this whole concept of BEKs and the possibility of it being involved with extraterrestrials and whatnot. Have you ever heard of any cases where somebody's encountered a BEK, right? And then after the confrontation, they started reporting abductions or sightings or any kind of that, nature?
Not at this point. I have maintained contact with a lot of the people whose accounts are detailed in the book, and, that's one of the things I'm sort of monitoring and really interested in, the follow-up effects. Now, I will tell you this, a couple of things. First of all, most of these people that I have interviewed, the greater portion of them have no interest in the paranormal when these encounters occur. The other side to this is that these people really, they display all the symptoms of a trauma victim. I mean, we're talking about a lot of these people have a great difficulty in sleeping. A lot of them refuse to ever go back to the location where the encounter occurred. They have a lot. Some of the people end up feeling like they're haunted by these kids in that, they'll wake up in the middle of the night in a sweat and believing that they've heard a knock at the door or on their bedroom window and firmly believing that those kids have come back. Some people, are very hesitant. There are a good number of stories that I couldn't even include in the book because, while the people want to talk about them and try to understand what they've encountered, they simply don't want their names out there. They don't want to be associated with these kids because they're afraid they're going to come back.
Right. Makes sense.
So it very much is like dealing with a trauma victim very often in these situations.
Now, I did hear one story about someone who let them into his house. And they were these two young boys were asking him to use the phone to call to get a ride home. And so he let them in, even though he felt something was strange, but he almost felt compelled to let them in. It's almost as if being under hypnosis. And when he goes to show them the telephone, he turns around and the boy is just standing in the hallway staring at him and says, "We've come to collect you." And,
wow.
if I would hear that and see these black eyes, I'd probably do what this gentleman did. He said he ran out the back door.
Right. Yeah. There aren't a whole lot of stories about people actually letting them in. As I stated before, I have maybe a handful of them. I chose to include the one in the book because I was able to interview these people on a number of occasions and, verify as many of the details as I could as far as the boy having a medical condition and these things. Again, the friend of a friend stories are pretty fascinating, but unless I can actually talk to the person, I usually don't address those too much, just because it's this whole thing, there's such a lure around these black-eyed children that it's growing more and more every year. And, like we've both stated, it's something that people are just incredibly intrigued by, intrigued and disturbed all at the same time.
Now,
right.
You mentioned that there are stories that go back in history. How far back are we talking about? Are we talking, decades, hundreds of years, even thousands of years?
Possibly. I mean, right now, since the book's come out, I've developed a couple of avenues of research into the topic that relate to some Native American tribal lore that seems to indicate, possibly some black-eyed beings. There are other accounts. There's one in the book that's pretty fascinating from 1950, and I often it was one of the early ones I discovered, and I was very fascinated by it just because, at the time, the skeptics were still jumping up and down that this was all fabricated, that it was a modern fabrication and influenced by television, or even today, some people will still say, well, television shows like True Blood and all the vampire movies and shows, and were depicted with black eyes, and even in the 90s, the X-Files had a alien hybrid thing that was depicted with black eyes. So I really set out to find some things that were pre-internet and even pre-television, and I uncovered one from 1950 about a young man living in a rural area, a farming community, who encountered a child with black eyes, and it was a very creepy account. This young man his name was Harold. He was walking home, and he reached the fence line that ran to his family's home, and he saw this young boy leaning on the fence. And he didn't recognize him right off, which was unusual because, it's a tight-knit community. They all knew each other. But Harold was a pretty good-natured guy. He just started talking to this kid. And in the course of the conversation, the boy's not saying anything, and Harold says, "Hey, are you okay?" And this boy, looks at him and says, "I want to go to your house. You take me up to your house." And, this young man just had a chill go over his skin like nothing he'd ever felt before, and, he's realizing that something really creepy is going on. As he's standing there, he's thinking about running up the drive to his house. And in what appears to be, a feat of mind reading, maybe this boy was just reading Harold's body language, but he quickly responds. Harold hasn't said anything, but the boy quickly says, "Now don't you run away from me. You're going to walk me up to your house." And, during the course of this, Harold has realized that this boy has solid black eyes, and combined with these creepy statements, that's enough to set him running and setting a record up to his house. And one of the unusual things that has shown up in a few accounts of black-eyed children is that as Harold is running, he hears what he described as the screech of a bobcat behind him, coming from this boy. And a bobcat makes a pretty strange noise. And it's something that, he's familiar with living in a rural area. But he makes it up to his house, and he tells his parents what happened. And he was fortunate in the fact that as a young man, he really wasn't very prone to making up stories or telling lies, so his parents believed him. Now, his father promptly took off with a shotgun to see, what the trouble was, and of course couldn't find anything. But Harold's mother, her response was that Harold met the devil. Now, this is a simple farming community, and they were religious, and she took him down to the local clergy to get him blessed, and that's how the story was always told, was that Harold had met the devil. The eyes went out of focus, even though they were a component of the entire experience. So, those are the kind of things we have to look for when we start looking at historical accounts, is that you take the focus away from the eyes and you look at some of the other creepy aspects to these encounters. That's when you find that, there really are older accounts.
Now, I had also heard of another account, Dave Schrader had mentioned this on his show, about, I think it was in the 1950s in South Korea. There was a girl who she wrote in and told this story about sleeping with her family. She was a young girl at the time. Back in those days, they slept on mats all together in the same room. And she woke up one night, and there was her brother standing there beckoning her to come outside and play. And she thought, well, this is strange. And he goes, come on, let's go outside and play. She goes, it's the middle of the night. We can't. We'll get in trouble. And he was repeatedly asking her to come out and play. And then she happened to look over, and there's her brother asleep right next to her. So there's this creature, this thing, whatever it was able to take on the image of her brother, and although it still had the black eyes. And of course,
right. And there are other accounts like that. I've traveled some in China, and of course in a lot of Asia, there's a whole lore of the hungry ghost. And a lot of, some of the Asian people I interviewed about this black-eyed children phenomena, they firmly believe that these things are a manifestation of a hungry ghost. Now that's essentially, in short terms, that's a restless spirit that is sort of stuck earthbound in order to experience and re-experience its desires. It's insatiable, whether it's for food or energy or any number of things. And they are sometimes described or depicted as having black eyes. So again, this is another case where this modern phenomena has connections to a lot of different aspects of the paranormal.
Now, let me ask you a question as well. With the evidence, has anybody ever come back with anything like physical evidence, like would you say like photographs or audio talking to the kids, or they left something behind, or fingerprints of any kind, or anything like that?
No, I've never heard of any of that. Of course, you Google black-eyed kids, you're going to get millions of images, and most of them are digitally manipulated. Quite frankly, a photograph really wouldn't do much, just because it's so easily
fabricated,
digitally fabricated. Yeah. Now, what is interesting in relation to that is that I have had some cases on occasion where there were security cameras present during the encounter with these kids.
Oh,
what I find fascinating is that very often, I've yet to see any security camera footage that is authentic. There have been cases where I believe the encounter is authentic, and there was a glitch in the security camera.
How about I expand on this a little bit more as well? Has there ever been a situation where, well, I guess we already touched base on that. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry. No. I was gonna say multiple people, like not just 2 or 3 people, like maybe like groups of 4 at a party or something, and somebody knocks on their, when the BEKs knock on their door, and it's like they're having a party. Hey, come on in. They just don't realize it.
I've never seen a party. I have seen cases where there were multiple people who encountered them at the same time. I don't think I've ever heard of any more than 3.
3, really? Okay.
3 people who all witnessed these kids. And,
wow.
Often it's only one of the people, or in a couple of cases there have been 2 of the people who really directly experienced meeting these kids.
Cool.
Now,
But, security camera thing is very odd. It's something that's come up on a number of occasions recently, and, once again, I have to bring up another paranormal phenomenon, the Men in Black. And a lot of times these encounters with the Men in Black, there is electronic interference, and that's something that also seems to happen with these kids on occasion.
Now, I had recently heard you on Whitley Strieber's show, and he had actually mentioned that he had his own black-eyed kids experience.
Yes.
So this is not just a local phenomenon with people, just writing in stories. I mean, I think that's one of the concerns of the skeptics is just that it's more of an urban legend and people are just making some stories that sound cool, sending them in. But
right.
it needs more credible people to be able to tell these stories. And if there was any type of proof, I mean, again, if we had video or if we had audio or some type of proof to help back it up, that would be great. But, you know, that's what we run into dealing with investigating the paranormal anyway, is not, these things don't, obviously don't perform on command.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, the other reality is if we're trying to gather physical evidence, often it's, you know, to help us in our study. At least that's what I believe. You know, I've been in the field a long time, and a photograph or a piece of video is never going to convince a skeptic. It just isn't. You know, there's some amazing pieces out there, and the skeptics are going to come up with some reason or excuse or, you know, something to explain it.
Well, we have to take a break. So when we come back, we're going to talk more with David Weatherly about the black-eyed kid phenomenon. And anyone in the chat room has any questions, go ahead and we'll start typing them up. Let us know, and we'll ask David for you. And we'll be right back with Unknown Origins Radio from the Global Radio Alliance. Welcome back to Unknown Origins Radio, where we talk about everything strange and paranormal. I'm your host, Mark Johnson, and with me tonight is our guest host, Chris Nicolleti. And tonight we're talking with David Weatherly about his book, Black-Eyed Children. Now, David, I wanted to talk to you real quick about, there have been other phenomenon with not only just involving children. I've heard stories of adults, too, that people have witnessed that have had black eyes. Have you documented that in your book?
That's not documented in the book for a couple of reasons. One is there are a number of those stories out there. There aren't as many about black-eyed adults. And one of the issues I found when pursuing the accounts was that it's much easier for an adult to do this as a prank. You know, there are black-eyed contacts that are available that cover the entire eye. And, you know, these accounts, I should emphasize, when people are encountering these children, the entire eye is black. It's not just the pupil. It's the pupil, the sclera, it's everything. Now, there are contacts that are available, and that's one of the arguments you'll hear from skeptics as to why it's all urban legend or hoaxing. But the contacts, they cost about $300 for a pair of them. You know, they're only available from theatrical suppliers, and it's not something that I feel like kids are going to go out and, you know, spend $300, probably of their parents' money, to buy contacts to just randomly scare people they don't know. Adults, on the other hand, you know, occasionally there have been some cases that seem like it was an interesting encounter of a black-eyed adult. You'll find some on the internet. You know, people will see a black-eyed guy sitting in a Starbucks or something, and quite honestly, you know, that very well may be some guy who snagged a pair of contacts and just wanted to kind of creep people out. It'll be interesting to see what happens as this phenomena continues to develop, as we continue to get more information about it, to see if some of these encounters with black-eyed adults are as interesting as the one with children.
Now, with this phenomenon, kids, I mean, kids using, contact lenses or doing a joke, I have trouble buying that, only because knowing how teenagers are, they could try to go and scare somebody and they'd probably get halfway through it and then they start cracking up. So as far as some of them seem to take this, I find it very difficult to believe that this is actually being perpetrated by children doing pranks on people. Because if it was, they're opening themselves up to a world of hurt. If they do it to the wrong person, that person might get scared enough to react violently and hurt somebody. But yet, so many people have have commented about feeling almost compelled to follow these children, and then the overwhelming feelings of dread that comes upon them. And I've also heard stories of people talking about this maybe being demonic and evil spirits trying to gain access into their house. You mentioned the one family that let them in and then had all sorts of bad and negative problems that went on for years. What can people take from this type of story? I mean, is this something that people should really be on the lookout for and be aware of?
People always ask, what do I do if I encounter these kids? And my first response is don't let them in, because we just don't know. It's very hard at this point to determine. There's some indication that these kids, if they're not bringing some kind of ill fortune themselves, there are some indications that they could be an omen of difficult things happening. There's been a number of cases where someone has encountered one of these kids and afterwards has experienced some unfortunate things in their family. They've had relatives die. They've had that fortune in their personal lives. So it's something that is definitely we should have a lot of caution if we encounter these beings, and take whatever measures you feel like on a personal level will help protect you. It's interesting to note that a lot of the people who encounter these kids, they're so affected by the experience afterwards that they're turning towards to a spiritual path. Whether it's one from childhood or a new one, they're looking for some level of comfort. And that's where a lot of people end up going. They go to, their version of God, basically.
Now, we have a question come in from Bill in the chat room. He had a question as, what is your best guess as to what this phenomenon could be and your reason for believing so? And I'll add to that by saying that I know we talked about different ideas on what this could possibly be, but what would your gut tell you that this would be as a paranormal researcher?
Honestly, no. This may sound slightly out there, but my belief at this point is that they are some kind of being that exists on a slightly different frequency or a different level of existence than we do.
Like a multi-dimensional?
Something that's happening. Yeah, I think there's some kind of interdimensional being. I think in some fashion they're either shifting into our level of existence, or there are some conditions that are causing these people to suddenly perceive these beings at the time, and that's what's happening. It's very curious to me that one of the things that's the most consistent is that these kids produce this level of fear and this high level of emotion within people, and there seems to be an indication that that's the goal. And it's speculated that there are some beings that actually can feed on emotion. If that's the case, that may be what these kids are doing.
Sort of like a succubus kind of thing?
Similar to a succubus, but closer possibly to, if you're familiar with the term thought form. So, something that is created or co-created even by us. There aren't many similarities in the victims of these beings, except one of the things that really stood out to me going through so many cases was that there's an inordinate number of people who are in positions of authority that confront these kids. We're talking law enforcement, military, doctors, and there's something to that. There's got to be a reason for that similarity.
Let me ask you this also, real quick, before you go to the chat question here. Has there ever been repeat cases, or just one shot deal, and then they never see him ever again?
Most of the time, it's a singular incident. There are a couple of occasions where the person sees one or more of these children on multiple occasions, but that's pretty rare.
Now, I tend to lean in your direction of what you're talking about being some type of interdimensional or otherworldly type of beings, not necessarily spirit, something that's trying to interact on our level. And the one thing that strikes me is the story that we mentioned previously about the girl in Korea, how whatever it was seemed to imitate the form of her brother, a shapeshifter. So it makes me wonder if these kids that are coming up to people's doors are actually, these beings are taking on the image of other kids or like maybe real people, and they're reproducing it, but the one thing that they're not able to fully reproduce is the eyes, which are the reason why they're black.
Another thing somebody had mentioned in a couple stories I've read had been the fact that they're taking the appearance of children and their size. It's their size that they're so small that it reflects back to ETs, grays. You know, people are, the whole idea of a hybrid, it could be just even grays in disguise using some sort of cloaking system or whatever. Somebody had said something along those lines where they just disguise themselves as a recognizable being that's going to be more, non-threatening. They're thinking it's non-threatening to whoever goes to answer the door, a child, right? And then their eyes are black because, they just don't mask their eyes. I've read that on occasion, too.
Yeah, it could be, and there's a lot of speculation that they actually are not, physically children, that they're some kind of beings that are much older and just taking this disguise, this particular guise in order to catch people off guard. And, the thing is that quite honestly, that does factor into the trauma that these people experience, because there's something about mixing children and the paranormal. It causes almost a disconnect in the brain. I've talked to a lot of these people who've had these encounters, and I believe that part of the level of confusion they experience is that as adults, we're programmed to think and to feel that if a child needs help, you should help them. But, here we have a condition where we're fighting our nature, wanting to help these children because something about the situation is causing an incredible level of fear. And that does very strange things to people's, mind and emotions.
Now, talking about that fear, this brings up another question that came into the chat room is, do you consider these entities malevolent because they produce this fear, or maybe is it a byproduct of the experience?
That's honestly difficult to answer with complete confidence. It's that on the surface, there are a lot of sinister implications to these encounters. And, at the same time, it's hard to deny that in some curious way, a lot of people who experience these beings seem to get on a better spiritual path afterwards. So it's something that I think is still sort of up in the air. It may just be a case where if it's some kind of interdimensional being, we may just not understand completely what's happening during the encounter.
Now, another question that's come in is from Big Bird in the question in the room is, how many cases are actually reported? Has there been an increase in sightings and or contacts of these children? I guess that would we'd have to figure in what time frame she's talking about.
Well, if you're talking about modern accounts, it's something that is definitely growing over the last several years. Now, I attribute that to a couple of things. One is just the incredible level of social networking and communication we now have with people around the world. And two, the paranormal has become hip in the last 10 years. So it's created a new level of comfort for people to talk about unusual things that they've experienced. I mean, I can remember when I got involved in the field, it was like pulling teeth to try to get information out of people about accounts and stories and things like that, because it was just, people didn't want to talk about it. It was weird. And, now it's cool. You walk into a party and say you're a paranormal investigator, and, everybody wants to line up and tell you their story.
Well, it certainly opens up a lot more doors this day and age. We are on internet radio. We're talking via Skype or Facebook and listening to different internet radio shows from all over the country. And so we are able to process information much faster than ever before. And, of course, the paranormal has just been exploding the last few years with all these different shows and groups popping up left and right.
Absolutely.
Now, with your own group, Two Crows Paranormal, have you ever got to personally investigate these black-eyed kid cases in your area?
First of all, I travel pretty extensively, so I literally investigate cases all over the world. I've been to locations where the kids have, been encountered, but as I stated before, I've never encountered them personally, and I've never found any physical evidence from the encounters. Now, there are reasons for that, too, I think, is that most of the time, these kids, they're not very active. When they show up at people's houses, they tend to knock on doors. Curiously enough, I've never heard of one ringing their doorbell. And in all the cases I've investigated, they always knock. They don't carry anything with them. They don't, young kids, if it was a normal kid, one of them's going to have a skateboard or an iPod or something, and nobody ever reports that from any of these kids. They're never carrying anything. They're never holding anything. They usually have their hands down by their sides or in their pockets. They don't touch things. It's very curious. It's not typical child behavior. So there's really not a whole lot of physical evidence we can look for in these situations, which, again, makes it all the more curious.
Is there any relation to black-eyed kid stories in compared to, let's say, over in England or Ireland, Scotland, where they have the stories of the fairies and the elves, leprechaun, the little folk over in those areas, and there's a lot of different stories that, Americans, when they hear this stuff, they think of the movies and, the Tinkerbell and all that. But, we talked with Barry Fitzgerald recently and, living over in Ireland and talking about some of, the darker stories that come in from the islands over there. Do you think that there's any relation with those types of stories compared to these black-eyed kid stories?
It's funny. Barry's a good friend of mine. We were actually talking about this very topic today. So, interesting timing. There are some correlations. There's a little bit of that covered in the book. The thing that I found the most similar were some of the tales of changelings, which in classical fairy lore is a case where fairies replace a human child with a fae child. And, in some of those stories, it's indicated that the child would have a strange appearance, whether it's different eyes or whatnot. And, it's something that needs to be explored a little bit more, but there are definitely some correlations. And people in the United States particularly don't realize that there's a very sort of dark, sinister side to classical fairy lore. And a lot of people here in the States, as you said, are used to seeing Tinkerbell or, happy dancing fairies, and the reality is much different when you start looking into some of those classical stories. So I think it's another indication that, once again, this phenomena is something that we've been dealing with for a long, long time, and we just have to keep exploring it in order to understand it.
What's the one aspect of this phenomena that you would say just fascinates you the most, or at least sticks out to you the most?
The two things that stick out to me the most, I think, are, one, this level of fear that is produced in people who encounter these kids. There's similarities with infrasound. There's similarities with something else going on a vibrational level. And that to me is an indication that there's something these kids are emitting. You know, in fact, Barry and I were talking about this today. It's when people are encountering these kids, it's not the fact that they have black eyes that's producing that level of fear. You know, that's simply it would be unusual and it would be unsettling to see someone with solid black eyes, but that alone would not cause a person to experience the level of fear they experience in these encounters.
Like euphoria, something along those lines? Sort of like that sense of uncertainty, or, you know.
Yeah, but it's the closest thing I've been able to equate it to is infrasound, because these people, they often feel, one way he described it to me as feeling like she had, drank 3 pots of coffee or something, and just that she was shaking, her nerves were jittery, she couldn't, she couldn't dial the phone very easily. So it's a level of fear and nervousness at the same time.
What is the frequency on that? There's a certain frequency. I forgot what it is. I don't know if it's like 5 kilohertz or something weird. There's a certain frequency. Once you get below that number, it's the freak out factor. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's correct. But the reality is that infrasound actually doesn't affect everyone the same way.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to people who have specifically experienced infrasound, and there's actually quite a variety in how people respond to it. And some people, curious enough, do feel it strictly in their nervous systems, and they just get very jittery. But the feeling of panic comes over some people from infrasound. The fact this feeling that they have to run away, that they have to get away. Yeah. And that comes up in these cases with these black-eyed children, and at the same time, these people experience this mental confusion because these kids, they speak in these very monotone sentences, and they repeat the same things, over and over and over again, and they're trying to lull people into it. It's as if a type of hypnosis or mind control is being attempted during these encounters, and they're really trying to convince these people to let them inside or let them in the car or whatever it is that they're requesting.
Hence what you said earlier about the whole ET hybrid thing, too. Mind control.
That's correct, yes.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm.
Now, we got a question from the chat room asking, all the reports that you have researched, what's the youngest age of one of these children that's been reported?
One of the black-eyed children, the youngest, and, bear in mind these people are estimating the age, but there are some people who estimate these children to be around 8 years old is the youngest age I've heard. Most of them seem to fall in the range of about 10 to 13. That's the most common age that I hear with these kids.
Wow. Well, we're actually coming up towards the end of the hour. So, David, I was wondering if you could tell people where they can find your book, Black-Eyed Children.
Absolutely. It's available at leprechaunpress.com. If you order from there, it's a signed edition, if that makes any difference to you. It's also on Amazon.com. And you can follow my work. I currently have a blog up, which is twocrowsparanormal.blogspot.com. Spell out the T, T-W-O. And there's a badge on there for my Facebook. I have a Twitter feed and everything else. I welcome people to follow me on Twitter, friend me on Facebook, and if you have accounts with these black-eyed kids, feel free to send me an email.
Now, are you going to be making any appearances? Do you do any lectures or anything?
Yeah, I'm kind of all over the place this year. I'm at the Sacramento Paranormal Summit in June. That's the middle of June. That's going to be a phenomenal event. Paul Bradford from GHI, Bill Murphy, Anthony Sanchez, Scotty Roberts, lots of great people there. That's the Sacramento UFO Paranormal Summit. SacUFOCon, I think, is the website. I'm also at the Alamo UFO Conference in Nevada next week. I'm at Scarefest this year in Lexington, Kentucky. That's the country's largest paranormal horror convention.
I may actually go to that as well. I may see you down there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an incredible event. Lots of great paranormal speakers and authors there. I'm at Wake Up Now in Albuquerque. and a handful of other things, some of which aren't confirmed yet. So just check me out on Facebook, and at the moment, that's the best way to follow me with my coming events.
Great. Now, Chris, you also are going to be appearing at some events here soon, aren't you?
Yeah, we're actually we're doing the New York Paranormal Expo 2012. You can actually just Google it. You'll find all the information, the address, how you can sign up for it and get down, get up there. There's quite a few people going up for that one. It's for Brianna Weiler. She's 12-year-old girl with cystic fibrosis. She's taking, the girl's going through a lot in her life. And so, so we're going up to support her. All proceeds go to her, from what I understand. So we're going up to do that. That's June 16th and 17th, that weekend. After that, we have our own event, Red Mill in Clinton, New Jersey, we're throwing together for August 4th. July, we're kind of, doing a lot of residential stuff we got going on. So we're not doing too much on the expos. And August 25th, we have, with Scared Paranormal, and I think you, Mark, and Lauren, right, are coming along for this?
Yes.
We're going to do Fort Mifflin. We're doing August 25th, 6 p.m. to midnight is the, public ghost hunt. And people can sign up for that on the Fort Mifflin website. Just do a Google search for them. It's going to be a great time. Brian's joining us from Haunt the Collector. Chris is going to be out there for Scared. All those guys, everybody's coming out to do this. My team's out there. It's going to be a great time. Got a lot of, little things going on, little surprise stuff happening as well. You have Medium on board. So we got that. And then, like I said, we just signed up with Haunted Entertainment. We're working with them right now. And we're doing a lot of events coming up with them. One of them, is also looking towards Scarefest as well. I think it's September it is. And then I'm going to
the end of September.
End of September, right. End of September, 28th, 30th, I believe, right? Something like that. And then also, I'm going to LA. I'm going to do some filming for, a national TV show, in about, 3 weeks. So,
excellent. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you both for coming on tonight. David, thank you very much for coming on and talking to us. And hopefully I can do the Scarefest too, because I'd love to meet you in person. We can hang out and swap stories.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been great.
Yeah, I'm going to hook with you up on Facebook. So
sounds good.
And Chris, thank you very much for coming on and helping out tonight. And,
anytime, Mark, give me a call.
Okay. And well, that for this edition of Unknown Origins Radio. Tune in here every week here on